sustainability goals. Our mini-grid work aims to increase awareness of mini-grid solutions that could address the issue of universal energy access for households, which is embedded in the 7th goal of the 17 Sustainability Development. To understand the ground realities, CSE carried out secondary research and virtual stakeholder consultations in India, and then cast our net wider to Africa and South Asia. The report on this will be published shortly. The scoping review provides only a bird's eye view of the landscape. In today's webinar, we hope to hear from some of the active promoters and practitioners of mini-grids in Africa. And we are very grateful for the response from each one of you for coming on board and sharing your experiences. I hand over the mic to my team member, Ms. Asta Pandey, who has some guidelines for us before we begin this webinar. Over to you, Asta.
Greetings to everyone on the program. Here are a few things to take care of before we begin. Please keep your microphones in mute, except when you are speaking. Panelist speakers are requested to keep their presentations within a time limit of 6 to 7 minutes, so that in the next 2-3 minutes, we can take a couple of short questions and comments from the other panelists and relevant questions from the attendees. The chat feature will be disabled after the first 10 minutes of the webinar to avoid interruptions. Attendees are requested to use only the question and box to pose their questions. Please identify yourself and your organization and country. Please mention the panelists to whom you want to address the question. We will be choosing the most relevant and clear questions to be answered. The session is being recorded and live streamed on CSE's social media and may be accessed later. Back to Koshi to introduce the panelists.
Thank you, Asta. We have brought together an interesting panel today. Let me introduce them to you. Suranjana Ghosh, Global Director of Partnerships and Campaigns, Power for All. She's located in Mumbai, India. Welcome to you, Suranjana. Suranjana is responsible for developing partnerships to accelerate universal energy access. She manages campaigns and coordinates partnerships between developers with communities to facilitate the growth of decentralized renewable energy. She has spent 20 years working with multinational brands, developing and executing strategies, building teams, and establishing processes to drive behavior change, business growth, and efficiencies. So a very warm welcome to you, Suranjana. Now I'd like to welcome Ms. Natieli Yetzi Acuna Castillo, a gender specialist from the SMAP program of the World Bank. She's located in Washington, DC. Natieli's experience is gender equality in diverse sectors, including digital governance, public management, transparency, and urban development and energy. She currently works as gender specialist at the World Bank. Prior to that, she was consultant for the Strategic Alliances of Americas for the International Red Cross and at the Inter-American Development Bank, where she served as gender and diversity professional. Welcome to you, ma'am. I would like to introduce my colleague Vineet Das, who is Deputy Program Manager, Renewable Energy CSE, located here in New Delhi, India. Vineet has been managing the RE program of CSE for over the last 1 year, conducting in-depth research and connecting with global community to advance our understanding of DRE. Vineet is also the author of CSE's mini-grid report. He has nearly a decade of experience in the energy sector, specifically in renewable energy. Welcome to you, Vineet. I'd like to introduce Ms. Ruchi Soni, Program Manager, Sustainable Energy for All. Ruchi is located in Abuja, Nigeria. Ruchi leads the Universal Energy Facility at SE for All, which is a financing facility which deploys energy solutions and provides verified energy connections to the end users. Earlier, she was at the UN Foundation, overseeing the Energy Access Practitioners Network and the Mini-Grids Partnership. She has supported the design and implementation of national level energy programs in Asia, including India, and as far as Fiji Islands. and Latin America, Africa, specifically Tanzania and Kenya. Welcome to you, Ruchi, and we look forward to your presentations. William Brent, Chief Marketing Officer, Husk Power. Welcome to you, William. William is based in Spain. William is a climate solutions evangelist responsible for developing and implementing marketing and communication strategy at the Husk Power. William has also spent several years at Power for All and Sustainable Energy for All. His expertise is in identifying and strengthening the core benefits of mini grids in the form of job creations, agricultural productivity, and provision of healthcare. Welcome to you, William. We look forward to hearing from you. Penny Jane Cook is Head of Strategic Partnerships at ARC Power, located in Kigali, Rwanda. Penny Jane is responsible for the strategic development of ARC Power. The firm provides affordable, reliable, and clean solar electricity to communities in Rwanda. She has over 12 years of experience in the legislative and policy environment, governing the RE industry across Africa. Her work also includes developing project pipelines in Africa, developing teams, and emphasizing stakeholder engagement. Welcome to you, Penny. We look forward to hearing from you. Oninie Enene Nenzulu, Head of Minigrids NG Energy Access, located in Nigeria. Oninie currently heads the Minigrids business of NG Energy Access in Nigeria. She leads a high-performing team that will electrify poorly served communities and stimulate demand for income-generating activities that can be made profitable in a short time. Prior to joining NG, she worked with energy market and regulatory consultants, where she provided her expertise on power utility management, tariff setting, and analysis of energy demand and market trends. Oninie is one of the first certified energy managers in Africa, certified by the Association of Energy Engineers. Charlene Nagawa, Design Engineer, Equatorial Power Limited, located in Kampala, Uganda. Charlene is a mini-grid design engineer with experience in renewable energy systems, policies, regulations, and financial strategies. At Equatorial Power, an RE company, Charlene has piloted integrated mini-grid projects dubbed the Utility 2 in Kiwamu Mukono district, which currently serves over 300 households. Now, I invite Ms. Suranjana Ghosh to deliver her opening remarks. Welcome, Suranjana.
Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from today. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome all of you, the esteemed panelists, among whom I'm delighted to see so many familiar faces from the sector, and of course, everyone in the audience, to this webinar on clean energy for energy access, mini grids in the Global South, hosted by the Center for Science and Environment. As mentioned by Koshi, I represent Power for All. We're a global campaign with more than 300 partners working to accelerate access to decentralized renewable energy in Africa and India in areas like powering jobs, agriculture, healthcare, and utilities 2.0. I'd like to start by congratulating CSE on the scoping study recently undertaken by them on mini grids and energy access in the Global South. This is a very timely and crucial study. The upcoming launch of their report, Mini Grids, A Just Clean Energy Transition, is poised to be a valuable resource for the DRE sector and its wider stakeholders to build an in-depth understanding of the current status quo and for comparative learnings between countries in Africa and South Asia. I can safely venture that mini grids are probably not a new concept for most of us in the audience here. We understand they are the fastest and the most cost-effective solutions to provide light to outlying settlements, enable industry in isolated places, and serve as a backup to the main grid in the events of power outages. However, there's now a critical need for us to expand the sectoral knowledge and conviction in decentralized renewable energy solutions and take it to broader audiences to help build demand, supply, enabling policies, career pathways, options for innovative finance, all of which will in turn enable the growth of a robust market and sector ecosystem. Now, mini grids based on renewables, as we know, are hybrid mini grids that generate a large portion of the electricity they distribute using renewable energy. These are gaining traction as an energy solution in locations where the demand is low and the grid extension is therefore not an economically viable option. Providing power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through a centralized infrastructure can prove to be both expensive and technically difficult. And as the distance from the point of generation grows, so do transmission and distribution losses. So in locations of non-viability for the extension of the grid, large numbers of people, as we know, go without access to energy, which again slows their overall markers of development. And in such places, or where there are frequent power disruptions or unpredictability in the access to energy, localized renewable mini-grids are appropriately agile solutions, which are both cost-effective and dependable. And so while renewable mini-grids can help us rethink existing energy supply models, however, their development as well as deployment call for a very careful balance of societal demands, political will, economic efficiency, technological capability, as well as environmental protection. And here's where I think the overall, the larger sector really has a role to play. Think tanks, policymakers, technology investors, project developers, the nonprofit sector, academics, all of us must work together in collaboration to address these interlinkages, and efforts like the scoping study and the upcoming report from CSE are very important steps in that direction. What else can be done? Public-private partnerships, loan grants can both assist in the development and the implementation of initiatives, while public venture funds and subsidies can aid with knowledge generation and exchange. Policymakers have a very vital role to play in establishing market rules that encourage commercialization of renewable mini-grid technology, allowing the businesses to expand. And market strategies again help innovations in the last stages of developing renewable mini-grids and flexible regulatory frameworks. So there's also a need to explore more integrated approaches which can unlock further opportunities. For example, Power for All's Utilities 2.0 pilot in Uganda is a collaboration between a mini-grid company and the utility, and it proves that an integrated approach accelerates the access to energy. And our partner from Equatorial Power, Ms. Shali, is a panelist here today who I'm sure can share more on this. Much progress has been made, and yet there's a significant distance to cover if we are to meet the SDG 7 goals of ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all by 2030. For all of us here today as practitioners and promoters, there is an urgency to speed up the development of the sector and adoption of DRE at both the local and national levels through an evidence-based approach for building awareness, advocacy, and amplification through studies like CSEs. There is immense potential in South-South cross-learning, which will unlock more opportunities. And without taking any further time, I'd like to hand it over to our esteemed panel for today, who will bring this alive for us through their insights and interventions. And on behalf of Power for All, I'd like to end by thanking CSE for this wonderful opportunity to share our perspectives on the importance of DRE for energy access, and all of you for your time. Back to you, Koshi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ranjana, for really opening the stage so wide for us for all our discussions. And I think we'll go ahead right now and wait for questions a little later. I call upon Ms. Nathieli to put discussion in the overall context of development financing and World Bank's clean energy objectives. Over to you, Nathieli.
Thank you, Koshi, and good afternoon, everybody. Hello from Washington, D.C. And thank you for the invitation for this interesting panel. From the perspective of gender, I think it is important for us to first understand that we're facing a world with a lack of data and information that actually allowed us to include more women in this particular sector. Also, we are very interested in including more women in this sector by understanding their needs, but also understanding what are the financial mechanisms that we need for them to be able to be part of the sector. It is also important for us because of this data and not only financial mechanisms and just thinking about the supply side and the demand side, but also to include women in decision-making positions and also as technicals in the sector. And assessing what are the real needs these women they are going to be part of the consumer side we are going to able to address. We know women face a lot of challenges in regards of accessing services, but also to be able to be part of these value chains that are really important. For instance, we know that women are lack of accessing of different technologies for them to be able to provide specific services, but also they are not able to access different type of careers in the STEM field. They're able to make them professionals and be able to provide the specific services, or even to, advance in those careers and being able to make decisions. Also, it is important for us to work in gender norms and gender and social norms for women to be able to start, lifting those barriers and working together with men for them to be able to provide the right benefits around society. In general, the World Bank and how we're working on this, and just thinking about this framework that I just explained quickly and maybe not in all of the details, we are looking for increasing energy access, and the mini grids, of course, have like a lot of potential for us to work on this, especially in the rural settings. Then we're looking for include more women as leaders and as technicals in the energy sector, but also, of course, in mini grids because of this potential that they have in specific communities, and improving livelihoods and productivity for women. Because at the end of the day, we're also not looking for, the supply side, but the demand side, and how we're able to contribute to the private sector, not at a large scale, but also like small businesses and medium scale businesses as well. So I'll stop here and we'll go back to you, Koshi, later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathieli, for that comprehensive view on World Bank and the global financing of mini grids. To put in perspective, CSC is not an implementer of projects. It's a public interest litigation, research and advocacy organization based in India. CSC is among the verticals that CSC works in. Renewable energy is quite important for us because it covers clean energy, energy efficiency, and touches upon the many aspects of climate change and sustainability goals. Specifically on our mini grid work, the aim is to increase awareness of mini grid solutions that could address the issue of universal electricity access, and for households, which is the goal which is embedded in the 17 SDGs. The seventh goal is where we are covering right now. And the CSC did a study to understand the ground situation. And we also did virtual secondary stakeholder consultations in India. And then we looked at Africa and South Asia, and the report on this will be available soon. The scoping study which CSC did covers India, but it's only a bird's eye view and landscape. So today we hear from my colleague Binit Das on India study and what that shows us. Thank you. Binit, over to you.
Thank you, Koshi. I hope that this screen is visible.
Yes, it's visible.
A warm welcome to all the panelists and the attendees who is attending across the globe. So based on their study of Center for Science and Environment, I, Binit Das, working as a deputy program manager, and started this study in the beginning of this year, and we have gained a lot of exposure and experience over India and global South, specifically in Africa. So as per the definitions of the mini grid is concerned, a capacity ranges from 10 kilowatt to 4 megawatt is mini grid, and less than that, that is 10 kilowatt is microgrid. So in India, we have a potential. We have studied and we have seen that there is a potential of 4 gigawatt of renewable generations through mini grid in rural India, and we have a draft national policies in 2016, but that is not yet passed by the parliament, as we all know. But some of the states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha have floated their mini grid policies. In 2017, the government focus has shifted in providing electricity to all the households by extending the grid. We all know that scheme is known as Saubhagya scheme in India. The main objective or the main aims of this program is to provide electricity for all in India using the national grid, expansion of the grid to the unelectrified areas or the remote villages. However, the definitions of the electrified households remain problematic till now. Till recently, the electrifications that we meant more than just a single wire of village connected to a grid. So in that case, the new definition says a village can be called as electrified if at least 10% of the households are connected. So yeah, we know where are we now correctly. CSC CSC is documenting the mini grid program to review the functioning and to identify models of scaling ups. The final cost to the end users and the affordability of break even of this decentralized clean energy is very much necessary. So in the next slide or the subsequent slides, I'll try to explain what are the break even costs for grid expansions and how this has been carried out in our scoping studies. A survey done by Center for Science and Environment of various models of mini grid in the country, that we found that the cost of generations per unit could range across 0.07 cent to 0.36 cents, depending on the size of the system and its configurations. We observed that the supplied energy costs are high, unaffordable, and generally used in many cases. But it has been observed that the people buy higher cost of electricity for their productive purposes, like industrial activities or commercial activities at their villages, even pumping the agricultural or the irrigation pumps. So even here it is very important that the cost of energy is reduced so that it can be used for all purposes, including cooking in households. Only then we can address the issues of energy poverty. So here are the lists that we have came across. There are almost 12 case studies that we have covered across India of various states like Sundarbans, Jharkhand, Maharashtra, Odisha, Rajasthan, Bihar, as well as Tamil Nadu. So we have covered all the technologies right from biomass to wind to PV as well as microhydro. So the draft policy encouraged states to use the enlisted guidelines to prepare their own policies. Uttar Pradesh, following this, has framed its own mini grid policy, while states like Orissa, Bihar, Jharkhand have included the component of mini grid in their wider renewable energy policies. So recently, Jharkhand had released their solar policies, which they have given a target of around 110 megawatt of mini and microgrids for the next 5 years. So further a special focus for Jharkhand state policies or the Jharkhand mini grid policies, that a special focus has been given to the solarizing different sectors like healthcare, education, agriculture, promoting productive use of solar electricity through livelihood applications. So based on various benchmarking studies coming to the African context or African geographies, there has been a benchmarking studies and comparing mini grid encroachment regulations. We have identified that 24 countries which are highlighted in greens are well organized in this mini grid sector, and their regulations are far more ahead with other countries. Starting this year, we are studying these 5 countries. We did a scoping study of Uganda, Tanzania, Nigeria, Rwanda, and Ethiopia that we have published. We chose this country because they have low electricity access and a proactive regulatory framework toward mini and microgrids. So end of these presentations, we will uploading the 2 volumes that we are going to release in our website. In 2019, in 2019, the 20 nations, these are the 20 nations with the worst energy gap accounted for 78% of global populations without access to electricity. So the 3 countries with the biggest deficits were Nigeria, DRC, Ethiopia, having 89, 70, and 58 millions of people respectively. Bangladesh, Kenya, and Uganda have improved a lot among these 20 countries. They have it's like since 2010, they have improved. So cost efficient technology to deliver electricity. The most cost effective methods currently we are delivering power through determined by both distance from nearest grid line and the amount of energy utilized. The cost of grid expansion amortized over 20 years. This study has been carried by C for All. In here we can see if the grid expansion is for example it has been for low income consumers, for example they can take the powers around 70 to 200 kilowatt hour per home. It is quite affordable for them. The cost will be 0.1 to 0.5 cents per kilowatt hour. But whereas for house with an annual energy access usage of 1000 kilowatt hour or more, the cost of power provided by grid extension, which is much higher. Sorry, the earlier one was much higher, much higher. This one is much lower when the annual demand raises to around 1000 kilowatt hour. The cost of expanding the grid is so soon recovered, so it can amount about $0.03 to $11. Coming to the findings, we have 5 countries: Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Ethiopia as well. So coming to the Ugandan government has traditionally prioritized their grid extensions over distributed energy in its long-term electrification policy since they have launched their electrification strategy plan in 2013. So the government has closely working with the German government, developing their enabling environment for mini grids. According to the electricity order they have released in 2007, off-grids or mini grids having a capacity of 2 megawatt or less are exempted from the licensing requirements. So mini grid developers can propose their tariff higher than on-grid developments of ERA for review. However, in response, the ERA can amend the proposed tariff, which can come closer to match prices paid on the grid. So there is no clear rule in Uganda for how the mini grid will interact with the central grid in future when the mini grid get built out, where the mini grid is not located, where the main grid is not located. In case of grid expansion. However, developers recognize that the grid is unlikely to get reached in the Lake Victoria, where they have more than 300 to 600 households that are gaining electricity as of now. So that is a good case we can see. At the end of 2019, Tanzania electrification rate was just 38%. In rural areas, the rate was considerably lower in 19%. The Tanzanian government aims to have 12,000 villages in the mainland of Tanzania by 2022. So this program is already on. They have recently launched. They have established a number of result-based financing program. So I won't go much into that. My colleague from C for All, Ms. Roji, will carry on the discussions on result-based financing. In Nigeria, we have seen the Nigerian mini grid sector has a turning point since May 2017. They have a multi-year tariff order that has been released and can be downloadable at their websites. Even we have been observing that the World Bank has issued a 350 million loan to the federal Ministry of Finance to implement the 5 years program known as the Nigeria Electrification Project. The program consists of 4 main components. So these are the 4 main components as you can see. Rwanda has a good enabling environment for green mini grids, has been established through the number of related policies like National Electricity Energy Policy, National Energy Strategy 2008 to 2012. These regulations governing the simplified licensing framework for government of Rwanda, which has been approved from the year of 2015. The regulations does not apply to the isolated mini grids greater than 1 megawatt or less than 500 kilowatt are exempted from need of license. So this are exempted from licensing requirements. We can see and the mini grids that less than 500 kilowatt are also less exempted from the license procedures, but they must notify to the authorities of the operations. Developing a mini grid regulatory framework is an integral booster confidence requires for comprehensive stakeholders engagement to establish policies, planning, and regulations, as we all know. So Ethiopian rural agencies has implemented 5 guidelines based that they call as mini grid directive. These are the 5 areas that they have covered. As per the licensing guidelines are concerned, they have created the mini grid directive and developing the accompanying resources, which will help in creating enabling business environment and engaging stakeholders in order to meet electrification's need. So the mini grid licensing guideline summarizes the new licensing process that accompany the mini grid directive in the country. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Binit. And I think that was very enlightening. And on the same countries, we have a good set of speakers. So let's look forward to what they share on their countries. And I think that will really supplement or complement the work CSC has done. Now I call upon Ms. Ruchi Soni of SE for All to speak on result-based financing in developing the mini grid sector. Welcome, Ruchi, to our forum.
Thank you, Mr. Koshi and Binit, for the warm welcome. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I hope you're well. My name is Ruchi Soni, and as was mentioned, I'm a program manager at SE for All, and I lead our work on results-based financing. I'm based in Abuja, Nigeria. Also, big thank you to the CSE team for giving us a chance to present our work. I have a few slides, just looking at the CSE team, if we can pull those up. In the meantime, let me get started. So I will briefly introduce the facility that we have and also share why we've decided to focus our facilities on mini grids and why we think it's a good investment. So before I start, a quick one-line introduction of SE for All. So we are an international organization that works in partnership with the United Nations and other stakeholders. These include the government, the private sector, philanthropy, and civil society. Our overarching goal is to drive action towards achievement of access to energy for all by 2030. And we in turn want this energy to be affordable, reliable, and sustainable. So next slide, please. So what is results-based financing and what is this universal energy facility? So the idea here is very simple. The idea is that the results-based financing is that it is a means by which we provide incentive-based payments to any and all eligible organizations or private sector companies that deploy these electricity connections and are able to provide us this proof of electricity going to the households. So essentially, this is one of those means where the private sector takes this upfront risk, but is guaranteed payment based on the result that we see. It also, as you can imagine, bypasses these long bureaucratic cycles of how financing is delivered to them sometimes. So the Universal Energy Facility is a multi-donor results-based financing facility, and you must have seen the logos on the slide before. If you can just quickly hover to the previous slide, please. And I generally like to emphasize this slide quickly because this shows that this is a collaboration between Sustainable Energy for All and a lot of other partner organizations that you see on the screen. So these include the likes of Rockefeller Foundation, Shell Foundation, Africa Mini Grids Developers Association, GIZ, IKEA Foundation, to name a few. Next slide, please. So we heard from Vineet already. I'll try not to dwell on this, but I think this audience knows this very, very well, that electricity access is growing, but it's not growing for everyone. There are still 759 million people worldwide without access to electricity, and 78% of them are in Africa and 20% in Asia. And I think it's a constant reminder to all of us that we're talking about people. We're not talking about numbers. We're talking about people like you and me. So projections, unfortunately, also show that we are not on track to achieving universal energy access. And we still expect to see anywhere between 660 to 780 million people until 2030 who would still be unelectrified based on current trends. So you'll see these two text-heavy slides, the next two slides, but the reason that I've sort of pulled these slides together is to show that we've picked results-based financing as a way to provide finance for these last-mile electricity connections. We think that RBF, or results-based financing, really provides this opportunity to place the risk on these companies, the private sector, but in turn also provide them this greater certainty that, yes, financing would be available to you once you've shown us the results. So coming back to our work, so the UEF, or the Universal Energy Facility, our ultimate goal here is to move the needle on the Sustainable Development Goal number 7 by really developing this facility as a $500 million facility and deliver over 1 million connections in most parts of sub-Saharan Africa and focus on over 300,000 clean cooking solutions, and all of this by 2023. And when I say connections, this includes solar systems and mini grids. You'll also see a couple of other figures on the extreme right of the slide, so I'm not going to dwell on those, but to say that this is structured as an ongoing fund. So it's not meant as a start or a stop project, but it's really meant as an ongoing fund where we're able to provide grants for these companies who provide these verified connections. Next slide, please. So before I go into sort of the details and a bit more on where we are on the UEF front, let me share quickly on why we decided to go with mini grids in our pilot phase. So right now, the UEF is operational in the 3 countries of Sierra Leone, Madagascar, and Benin. And our analysis shows, based on the State of the Mini Grids report that came out a year and a half back, that almost 111 million households, that's roughly 47% of the unelectrified, can be served by mini grids in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and island nations. As I think was also evident that the cost of the mini grid technology has gone down and has become increasingly competitive. So the per kilowatt hour cost of mini grid electricity is really expected to decrease. And I remember looking at the latest figures by 2/3 by 2030. So we're really talking about very competitive market here. And finally, we've seen a lot of increased number of interest and strategic financiers such as utilities, oil majors, trading houses that have started participating in the mini grid sector, mostly I would say around 2018. So this is where we think our RBF facility can pull together some of these advantages that focus on mini grids and be able to spur the market. And one last point, I think, to the credit of the Africa Mini Grids Developers Association here, the sector has seen impressive scale-up phase. So this obviously not taking away the COVID-19 context, which has changed the trajectory a bit, but the sector really went from seeing, I would say, around 2,000 connections in 2016 to almost 41,000 connections in 2019. So that speaks to the growth of mini grids overall. So on this slide in particular, I would assume you'll likely receive these slides, but I want to focus on 3 quick aspects that you don't see here explicitly. So what our goal really focuses on these 3 S, as I like to call it. So one is simplicity, second is speed, and third is scale. And what we are essentially trying to do with this 3S is really unlock massive amounts of finance for the mini grid sector. And I'll dwell on each of these very quickly. So why simplicity? Simplicity because the UEF offers a fixed amount per subsidy per connection, which is pegged at $433 for every mini grid connection in this first phase. So as I mentioned, we are active in the 3 countries of Sierra Leone, Madagascar, and Benin. And any one developer who's gone through the UEF process and is qualified gets a $433 per connection based on a successful verified connection that they make. I should nuance this to say that we will continue to evaluate the subsidy amount, especially as we expand from country by country, but the simplicity of our model is meant to remain more or less consistent. Next point on speed. So what we also want to do, and this is where I think we compare ourselves with the, so many other energy access projects going on in the sector, is to track the efficiency of our process. So we run our process through a UEF platform, which is all online and really not sort of meant to be passing documents in person around, but really meant as this, one command center for everything that's related to the UEF, which is run through Odyssey. So I think we all understand that the RBF is a market development tool. So we really want to show its efficiency and efficacy around it. And this is where we want to hold ourselves responsible as we hold this donor money that gets passed on to the developers, that we'll be efficient in how this is delivered. And my final point here is going back to the point of the third S, which is scale. So very often, and I think this is what SCSC's report will spur again the market here, but we often hear of this lack of data in the sector. So this is again at the very heart of what we are trying to do. So using this platform that I referred to, but use it to collect, aggregate, analyze data is something we are really excited about. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we don't sit with this data, but we really make this publicly and transparently available. To my final point, if you were to take one thing away, I would say the UEF, or the Universal Energy Facility, is not meant to be a start and stop model. So we really want to see ourselves as a long-term model. And our ultimate goal again here is a facility that delivers at least over 1.3 million connections by 2023. Next slide, please. So I referred to parts of this already, but we're at a very exciting overall. So we just heard a commitment of $50 million coming to the UEF as of last week. This is a nice segue into showing where we are right now. So again, as I mentioned, we're active in 3 countries. We have 6 million, which we're dispersing at this $433 consistent subsidy. And then we are almost hoping for over 13,000 connections coming across our pilot phase, or this wave 1. Next slide, please. So this slide repeats a bit of the information in the last slide, but I want you to focus on the second row here, which talks about what we are looking to replace in terms of the diesel and petrol generators that would be replaced. What is a CO2 emission abatement that we are looking at? But I think my final point here would be to make the point that what we've seen from the UEF is this proof of concept. So to mention that the UEF was launched in October of 2020, and we really these projects, so mini grid projects being built in Madagascar in particular, as this first between a year of starting. So this is something we are really happy to say that UEF is nimble enough that we've seen these successful connections come through fairly quickly in the span of, let's say, energy access projects over. And in fact, seeing a bit more of that in the other 2 countries now increasingly. But overall, I think that to us was a testament that this model can work. There are efficiencies that we are tweaking in our process. But overall, we are very proud to say that we're seeing some of these electrons being really sent across the wire in Madagascar to begin with. That's everything from my side. But again, very happy to take questions. So back to you, Koshiji or Binit.
Thank you, Ruchi. I think you threw a lot of light on the different areas of work, and I'm sure it really complements the presentation that the others are going to make on their country and the work. There is one question, and I haven't got a reply to whom he is addressed to, but I will read it out. Yeah, it is for the sustainability of mini grids in developing countries. We need to plan mini grids such that they remain sustainable even after 20 to 25 years. That is, the mini grid project remains purposeful and functional even after the country is recategorized as a developed country. Thus, my question is, what are some of these key considerations we need to keep in mind while planning mini grids in these developing and underdeveloped countries? Would any of the panelists who already made their presentation, their talk, like to answer this? Should I repeat the question again? What are some of the key considerations we need to keep in mind while planning mini grids in these developing and underdeveloped countries? I think that is what will come through the whole of our discussion today. And interestingly, this is one of the questions we'll have in our poll also, where we want to understand what the audience, what the participants feel about it. But if any of the panelists would like to make a comment, you're welcome to do so.
Maybe I can jump in here, Kashi. One of the things that is important to understand when we're investing, not only mini grids, but in general in any type of energy solution, has to do with the context that we're dealing with, right? One solution is not going to fit all, and it could be mini grids, it could be grids, it could be like a lot of different things. And knowing the communities and the different, the communities and the population there you're trying to reach, what are the resources they have, what are the governance that they have, is also really important for us to be able to provide financing, if any, or try to provide any grants. Also, it is important to understand as well that the technical skills that these people are going to have to be able to implement correctly are also big part of whatever you're doing. Because if you don't have the installed capacity for us to invest and to keep going in and to keep expanding the access of people, it is something that is also into consideration. So I'll stop here. I bet that, as you said, most of the discussions are going to turn around given this answer of what is going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natyali, for this response to that question. Now, I think I'll go on to the next speaker. That is Mr. William Brent of Husk Power. William, we are really looking forward to your presentation because of the long career you had in this sector, and you looked at many parts of the world. So we are really looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to CSE for putting this session together. As mentioned, I'm William Brent, the Chief Marketing Officer at Husk Power. Briefly, Husk, from our point of view, pioneered the mini grid industry in 2008. It was started in India by Indians. Our staff on the ground in India is 100% local. Same is true for our other markets where we're active, like Nigeria and Tanzania. So I'm the outlier in Husk. We have a technology solution that combines solar PV, waste, biomass gasification, and battery storage. Those three things combined provide a 24/7, 100% renewable solution that can power a mini grid 24/7. We have about 150 mini grids in operation today. We're the only mini grid operator that's active across both India and Africa. And this is an important point that I'll come back to, because I think somebody talked earlier about being able to transfer knowledge from earlier mini grid markets to developing mini grid markets. And this is something that we found extremely helpful in terms of scaling in Africa. The company's raised about $30 million so far. We're raising another $100 million in equity and debt right now, largely to help scale our business in sub-Saharan Africa. And since one of the topics of conversation for today's session was also around gender, Husk Power is also in the process of trying to become compliant with the 2X challenge, which essentially sets certain targets by the G7, sets certain targets for companies to achieve within our sector around not only gender equity and equality within the operating business itself, but also for female customers within our service area. So this is something that we have taken on as a priority, and we are doing quite well in making progress there, but still there's a lot more to do. In terms of Africa, we obviously see it as a huge opportunity. We entered the Tanzania market in around 2015, 2016. We entered Nigeria in 2020. And we're now very much focused on scaling in Nigeria and making sure that that's a best case study for Husk and our eventual expansion into other markets. We launched our first batch of mini grids last fall in Nigeria. That was 6 mini grids that we commissioned in one go. It was the first time that a company had done a batch of mini grids launched at the same time. We expect to launch our next batch in the next month or so. and have 25 or so in operation in Nigeria by the end of the year. Our goal for Nigeria by 2026 is 500 mini grids. We've built a very strong pipeline of projects. We also signed a UN Energy Compact early this year with the pledge to build 5,000 mini grids across Asia and Africa by 2030 as part of our commitment to SDG 7. We're also in deep discussions about entering other markets in Africa in various territories, East, West, Central, and Southern. And we are always looking for potential partners and working closely with governments in those regions. So feel free to reach out to me directly to discuss that. I think that there are a couple things I'd flag in terms of key learnings for Husk over the last decade that are key to scale at speed. One is that we feel very strongly that any of the innovation that's happening in the mini grid sector needs to be frugal. Frugal meaning what? Meaning that both the mini grid business model that we are engaged in is cost sensitive, and then our customers are price sensitive. So any innovation that we're doing has to be affordable for us and for the customer. So I think that's an important point. We have actually worked extensively over the past decade to integrate both Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, to largely automate our operations for the mini grids, while also introducing digital tools that can effectively manage both supply side and demand side for our portfolio of 150 mini grids. So this gives us an ability to cost effectively scale where we can manage thousands of mini grids at once across a wide array of geographies. The other thing I would say that's important that we've realized is that we really need to take an ecosystem approach when thinking about the rural energy economy. Mini grids obviously generate, transmit electricity, and that's still the core of our business. But we also, have been able to diversify our business model to capture what we think of as the entire rural energy ecosystem. This includes appliance sales as well as turnkey C&I. Lastly, on that ecosystem concept, it's also very, very important because demand and generation within our mini grid communities continues to be a challenge for the industry as well. So making sure that we have a good mix of customers that goes beyond just homes and puts MSMEs and productive uses of power at the center of what we're trying to do. That will allow us to be, sustainable and viable over the long term. So I maybe on the last thing I'll mention is just some of the challenges that we see in our operations across Nigeria and Tanzania, and why we entered those markets in the first place. And the starting point really is around strong, clear national and subnational policy and regulation. We see Nigeria's regulatory and policy framework as a best practice for Africa that other governments can follow suit and model themselves after. This is, happy to get into more detail around the Nigeria electrification project that's been using performance-based grants to great effect to scale the industry. Unfortunately, we have about a 50-member team on the ground, 100% local Nigerians, but they weren't available to speak today, but maybe at a future panel. So that's one thing, so the regulatory framework. The second is access to affordable local currency debt. We have significant amount of foreign exchange exposure, especially in countries like Nigeria. So aside from performance-based systems or policies or programs that address the upfront CapEx cost, we also need to make sure that some of that CapEx is coming in the form of affordable local currency. Third, I would say that streamlining approvals and permitting to allow for greater scale is also something that still needs more work. So we're moving away from one large ticket project to bundling many smaller ticket projects. Fourth, and then one more to follow that, I would say, if governments should be encouraged, and we're encouraging governments to heavily encourage the growth of local manufacturing and supply chain. We've seen, significant supply chain disruptions over the past couple of years. We don't expect those to go away. Importation and landing costs of our components is going up. So whatever can be done to promote local manufacturing and assembly is something that we would welcome. And then lastly is just in addition to the question around, what are some of the keys to sustainability of the industry over the next 20 to 25 years? Because we're going to these communities for 20 to 25 years. We're becoming a partner with them. So this has to be something that can last over time. In addition to the CapEx subsidy that the performance-based grants provides, I think increasingly we're going to have to start looking at what other form of support comes on the OpEx side. So it's true that there are certain upfront capital costs that need to be supported in building mini grids, but once they're built and those connections are made, are there mechanisms in place that allow for sustainable operations of those mini grids over the lifetime of the system? And does that require some form of subsidy? I should say that Husk doesn't take subsidy in India for any of its projects. We compete head to head with the grid purely on a commercial basis. We are growing year on year in India. In Nigeria, we do take a performance-based grant. So it's a complicated issue. Not all markets are the same. Some may need subsidy more than others. Is that CapEx subsidy only or OpEx subsidy? So those are my quick thoughts, and I'll leave it there and look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. There are no questions. Even if the panelists want to ask questions to the speakers, please do. We'll give you time for that. I think we'll move on to the next presenter, which is Penny Jane Cook, Head of Strategic Partnerships, ARC Power. Welcome to our forum, Penny Jane.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Ironically, I don't have any electricity at the moment, so I hope you're all able to hear me okay on my internet connection. Am I clear? Yeah, great. So also thanks to William for that clear introduction, I think, into some of the challenges we're all facing in the mini grid sector. As was mentioned, I'm Penny Jane, Head of Strategic Partnerships at ARC Power. And ARC Power is a solar PV mini grid service provider, and we're currently operating in Rwanda. So maybe just to get a bit of context, I'm going to talk more about the policy landscape that we're dealing with in Rwanda, but just in terms of a bit of context to kind of lay the scene of where we are as a company. ARC Power, we sort of started out in Rwanda in late 2018, early 2019 with our pilot project that we implemented then. And then in Q1 of 2019, connected our first customer. In 2020, our focus was really on expansion to 1,500 connections, which equates to around 7,000 people connected to first-time power. And then a big focus on productive use, I think, as William touched on, to make these mini grids commercially viable and to make sure you have sustainability. You really need to focus on things like productive use and appliance sales, and really making sure that households and businesses are using your electricity more from a commercial standpoint, and to really improve their livelihoods as opposed to just for basic living. That's been a big focus for us in 2020. If we look at today, we currently have 4 mini grids that are operational in Rwanda. That's across 2 districts in the country. It's around 2,000 connections, which equates to about 10,000 people, both business, industry, and households that we've connected. Also obviously some government buildings, schools and healthcare centers, also part of those connections. Something that's also really key in terms of the policy landscape and in terms of my role around focusing on expanding into the continent is that we are now expanding into the Southern African region. And what that looks like for us is that we will have 2 pilot sites, one operational in Mozambique and one in Zambia towards the end of this year. So that's our focus for Q4 of this year. And then also expanding into Malawi with a pilot project operational there at the beginning of 2023. And yeah, so just in terms of the relevance around this, so from a business model perspective, especially for ARC Power, what's important is scale. And as much as we are really happy with our 4 mini grids that we're currently operating, our aspirations for Rwanda were to have 20,000 connections in place by the end of 2020. So you can see that from what we have at the moment, we're way behind that target. And that really speaks to the policy landscape and the challenges that we've faced in country. And also just in terms of what I mentioned around these multiple countries that we're now looking at in Southern Africa, that's really around mitigating risk. So what you have a lot of the time, especially in this African market, is a regulatory framework and a policy framework that is changing. It can be a bit like quicksand at times, where government will change their minds and change their policy. And you need to be quite agile as a company, as a startup in Africa, that you can actually be moving between countries. So to really mitigate your risk in this environment, important not to just focus on one country, which I think has been a key learning for us. That can be quite challenging, because another thing that's really important is to have a pilot in place so that you can actually prove your concept. So if you're a new company coming to the space and you don't have anything built on the ground, it's really hard to get, well, I would say impossible to get funding. So trying to balance having a pilot, having operational space, but also then mitigating your risk by being operational in a few countries is really a key challenge that we found. And then something else that's really important is that you have to be able to have a project pipeline in place to really prove to funders what you're going to do with your funding. So if you're in a policy landscape that's shifting, where you can't really show this pipeline, that in itself has some key challenges. So just from the Rwandan policy context, and maybe just a bit of an update on what was shared earlier. When we started our pilot in early 2019, the current framework that is now in Rwanda was not in place. And it was a much simpler context. So it was merely a case of getting approval to the district. So we just had to go to the mayor's office and just get to the district, talk to them about where they wanted us to operate, and then get approval in that sense. However, in late 2019, the current regulatory framework for mini grids was then brought into effect. And maybe just a comment on that, I think William touched on it too. A stable and good regulatory framework is really important. So governments bringing in these regulatory frameworks is really key and really necessary, and something that we support. The challenge is if you're already operating in that context or trying to operate in that context and regulations come in, there's often a disconnect between the framework and between the regulator's ability to actually administer it. So that was a key challenge that we then found in Rwanda, was there was a lack of capacity in the regulator to actually administer the regulations. That does provide an opportunity in that it allows you to really work with the regulator to set up the correct systems that should be in place, but it does lead to huge delays. So I would say I would attribute that as one of the key factors that's really prevented us from expanding to the extent that we would have liked to as a company, because you have had this lack of capacity within the regulator, this lack of ability to really roll out the regulations, which has meant that there haven't been approvals happening at the scale that the sector really needed to see, to the point where the mini grid sector has stagnated quite a lot in Rwanda. And then the one other point that I'd make around the policy is that there's also been a changing policy landscape in Rwanda. So the National Electrification Plan was brought in to really clarify the space for the electricity sector. And what it did was highlight what areas of the country were for grid expansion and what was for the off-grid space, both in terms of solar home systems and mini grids. But in the 3 years that we've been operational in Rwanda, the National Electrification Plan has changed 3 times. And obviously every time the policy is reviewed, there's a period of time when it's not available to be implemented. So you can't then actually be applying for sites. So I guess what I'm trying to highlight with all of this is that there are sort of key challenges, but also opportunities for a company. So when you're working within a changing policy landscape, I think it's a bit of a certainty that even when there are policies in place, I think our colleagues from the Uganda context will also mention that even when you have these policies and these agreements with governments where the private sector is working with, you will still get delays. There will still be changes, there will still need to be refinements, which means if you're only operating in one country, you're very likely to stagnate in your operations. I mean, and what that means from a funding perspective is that you really need patient, flexible capital that is prepared to allow you to pivot between these countries. So having capital that you can then deploy into whichever country is moving in that moment, and having operations that can be flexible enough to be operational in those various countries is really what you need to be able to pivot between these various countries and remain operational. And obviously, I think, as William mentioned too, is this government support and this willingness and this policy certainty is what companies are really striving towards. And I think what is quite challenging for us and a bit of a reality of working in Africa. So if that can remain the focus of the industry and how we work around that, both from the operational perspective, from development agencies, but also from funders, so that we can all work together to really face that challenge and make sure we can then be building the industry in that context. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Penny, for especially sharing the experience of Rwanda in the mini-grid sector. I'll now go on to Ms. Oninie of NG Energy Access to share her experience with Interconnected Mini-Grid Acceleration Scheme, IMAS, that's in practice in Nigeria. Yeah. Welcome to Oninie.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Greetings from Abuja, Nigeria this morning. A big thank you for having me. Thank you to the Center for Science and Environment for extending this invite. My name is Oninie Nenzalo, Head of Mini Grids for NG Energy Access Nigeria. By introduction, NG Energy Access is in 9 African countries where we're a leading SHS and mini grid solutions provider, essentially focused on bridging the energy access gap in Africa. Today, we have over 1.5 million customers, and we've affected close to 7 million lives by reason of that. We deploy solar home systems across the range, from a 10-watt light bulb to a fridge, and of course, we also build mini grids, and that helps us to plug that gap, depending on the tier of energy access that is required at the time, and that, of course, the customers can afford at the time. But today, my focus will be around the regulatory framework in Nigeria and interconnected mini grids as we have it in Nigeria. Rightly mentioned by some of the earlier speakers, Nigeria has, on paper, one of the best mini grid regulations in Africa that allows for both isolated and interconnected mini grids. Interconnected mini grids in the sense that you can have a mini grid that is connected to the grid and maybe using part of the grid infrastructure to deliver power to customers. What is typically referred to in some literature as undergrid, customers that even though they have infrastructure, distribution lines running across their network, service reliability is so poor, sometimes power is only available 2 to 4 hours in a day. And then in instances of faults or outages, it takes a very long time for the utility to get to those locations and plug the fault. So we have customers that we can define to have energy access, but in reality, the quality of power that gets to them is quite poor. So in those instances, our regulation has allowed for interconnected mini grids that allows a win-win-win, between the utility, a private developer, and of course the customer to get into a tripartite agreement and will allow the developer to pay the utility some sort of distribution use of service, depending on their agreement, for using the distribution line already installed by the utility, and then installing their own generating unit, in this instance, usually solar systems, to then supply power to that community. So in that instance, one of the things that it does is that it significantly, by certain percentages, reduces the capex cost, the upfront cost of deploying, that mini grid to that location, because the cost of distribution network has already been built, and all the private developer has to do is to then keep paying a distribution use of service to the utility at this instance. The regulation allows for those agreements once you have agreement between the utility, the private developer, and the customers, very clear written regulations on how you can file those documents. Thankfully, through the support of the RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute in Nigeria, this business model has been tested in Nigeria, in a location in the southwest Nigeria, where not deployed by NG, deployed by another developer, where they were able to deploy a 100 kilowatt system, connect about 300 customers, and provide supply to those customers. The results show that there's 24-hour power available from 4 hours a day to 24 hours. Outages do not last for more than 5 hours in a day. Of course, this developer has also been able to stimulate demand for these customers and to grow utilization. Within the first year of installation, move from 200 customers to 300 customers, more than about 50% increase in demographic growth, and the information, from the customers, the feedback from the customers show that power is available and demand has been simulated for them and that electricity is available. Today, the GIZ is also trying to implement on a larger scale, has identified developers that would also go ahead and do this on a larger scale for at least 20 other interconnected mini grids, across the nation with other utilities, with other distribution companies. In Nigeria today, we have 11 distribution companies. So not just the one that it was piloted in, but also with other distribution companies, just to fully test the business model, see that it works, understand the challenges, understand the successes, and then hopefully in another year or two, be able to roll it out across the country. What this does is that it brings that proper handshake, between utilities and the private sector to be able to guarantee energy access and reliability for customers in a lot of these instances where, even though the grid infrastructure is available, power is not available consistently for the customers to utilize power. Of course, in terms of the challenges that has been faced, the typical challenges that have been mentioned here, finance, but thankfully in this instance, there were some subsidies and upfront capex, for the developer, and then the regulatory environment has also allowed for it, and we can see that it is working. The use of procurement of foreign materials, as we have it in Nigeria today, a lot of the solar PVs and the systems that you need to run this, and infrastructure that you need to run these systems are not manufactured in Nigeria today. So those were some of the challenges that were faced in the project. But one pilot has been successfully implemented. We look for the launch of another 20, and then hopefully that model becomes available to be replicated across Nigeria and hopefully across Africa. I think I'll take a break here. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's very enlightening. Is that something which only can answer, or so shall we take it later? Take it later. And the very warm welcome to from. Sorry. A very warm welcome to you, Sharmin Nagawa. We'd like to hear from Uganda your story of how the mini grids have changed this environment, or how they have been, what are the challenges that they are facing. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Koshi. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, my name is Sharmin Nagawa, and I'm currently a design engineer at Equatorial Power. So Equatorial Power is a mini grid developer in Uganda that has a vision to enhance energy access, but also implement it with the productive use of energy through boosting the customer consumption. So I will just give a brief introduction of the Utility 2.0 project, which is the main focus that will lead me to the regulatory framework and how we implement this in all our operations. The Utility 2.0 is a 40 kilowatt peak plant that supplies up to 370 connections to a community that's about 3 kilometers from the mini grid. And this project brings together collaboration between a mini grid developer and the national utility, which is Uganda. In this case, a mini grid developer is Equatorial Power on this project. So normally, mini grid developers operate territories that are 7 to 10 kilometers from the national grid, while the utility is responsible for territories that are within 1 kilometer radius from the national grid. So because of this, there is slow energy access for territories between the 3 to 5 kilometers from the national grid, and that brings a gap to energy access in the country. So the vision for Utility 2.0 is to boost this energy access by accessing those territories and also boost consumption behaviors. So under this project, we are currently operating on the site and operationally and also technically. And once the grid extends, then the utility can operate this number of connections. And under the regulatory framework, we operate under the isolated grid framework of 2020. Previously, we operated under the isolated grid framework of 2007. However, this framework was inconsistent, especially in schedules, and there was unclear distinctions between a license exemption holder, in this case for like the 40 kilowatt peak plant, and a full licensee, that is a mini grid developer who has capacity above 2 megawatt of solar PV. So because of these inconsistencies and the gaps that existed, these delayed the project development phase for the different projects. And because we had to keep seeking clarity. For every question that we had to keep seeking clarity, writing emails, reaching out to the regulatory, so that ideally delayed most of our projects. However, with the new framework, there are clearer guidelines on the application process. So this has eased the project development phase. This has eased the project development phase for the utility 2.0 project. And under the 600 kilowatt peak plant, which we have in Lolwe, we did experience the operations under the 2007 framework, but right now under the 2020 framework, prior to integration, we have permission to submit one application for multiple developments, that as long as it doesn't exceed 2 megawatts. Yeah. So if say you have different mini grid projects in a specific territory, you don't have to apply several times for each of them. You can submit one application for that. So that eases the development phase. Then also, in addition to this, the tariff review application format is now available, which allows flexibility to negotiate the tariff with the regulatory depending on the costs that have been incurred, the community development, and the operations that are happening. So there's flexibility with the regulatory to apply for a new tariff. And then also with the new regulatory framework, we have testing of the electricity meters that are on the grid entirely. That's isolated grid, and these comply with the new meter guidelines. So this ideally also protects the customers. Yeah, the new framework protects the customers, that they have good quality meters to ensure proper supply of electricity. Then at the point of integration, in the previous framework, it was unclear what notice period the mini grid developer has to give before exiting the site. So at the point of integration, when the national grid is extended to that community, it is mandatory for the mini grid developer on site to exit and hand over to the national utility. So in this case, under the Utility 2.0 project, it has been defined within the 2020 framework for a 5-month period of notice before we can hand over. In this regard, it helps the mini grid developer to prepare for the integration decision they have to make in collaboration with the utility under the Utility 2.0 project, but also it dismisses issues of discontinuity. So a mini grid developer does not have to abandon a site immediately, but would have to wait for the national grid within the notice of 5 months. In addition to this, before the national grid is extended, to protect the mini grid developer, the rural electrification program would have to give a notice of 6 months before grid extension. So this transparency with the new regulatory framework has eased the development of the interconnection for the Utility 2.0 project. In addition to this, we have guidelines on how a mini grid can terminate operations on site. These have been stated out in the framework, and it has eased our planning purposes, and we've been able to implement this in the different business models. Also, the distribution and connection designs for different projects across must take into account all customers who are within that territory. Previously, the guidelines were not so clear, so we would focus on maybe very concentrated areas. Say in a region, we only focus on the town that has most of the customers. However, with the new guidelines, every connection along the way of the line should be connected to the isolated distribution network. So with these new regulatory frameworks of 2020, the modifications, it has enabled us to plan forward, to know what integration option we are going to take, and to enable us plan for scale up of such a model. The only limitation with this project, the only limitation and setback has been transparency and access to the mini grid, and access to the electrification plan. With that transparency, with lack of that transparency, we're not able to plan on where next to apply for implementation of such a model or any other mini grid development project. So for that, I'll just have a summary of that if anyone has a question regarding this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing the experience of Uganda in this session. And, we've had such varied discussions and experience projects, and from point of view of funders and developers, we thought we could have two polls, one after the other. And I would call upon my team at CSC to launch the first poll. This is for the participants, the attendees primarily. So let's have a go at the polls. Saroj, can you get it on? In your experience, what are the main reasons for the failure of mini grids in remote communities which need them most? So the audience can pick more than one answer, I understand. Be on for 30 seconds. I hope the attendees are responding to our poll.
Saho, you are getting responses?
30 seconds, it's on. Oh.
Yeah, we have get around 28 response.
Okay.
That's what we wait for.
Thank you very much. The purpose of it is not to select any one, but the whole relativity of these issues. And I think it came out very clearly from the presentations too. We have one more poll, and I hope all of you would be responding to that.
The results of the first poll.
Yeah, the results of the first poll, 56% felt that it's poor community engagement leading to low confidence in the system that led to failure. And 41% high tariffs without service reliability. And almost identically equal points for the central grid making and long wait for O&M support leading to loss of output. The least significant seems to be inefficient billing and collection leading to losses. I'm sure this varies from country to country in Africa as well as in India, between states and between programs and projects. So thank you very much. This is very insightful from what you have responded. Can we go on to the next poll, please?
Thank you. We will move on to the next.
Can you please change the thing? Yeah.
Which, in your understanding, is the most important factor among all that would enable the success of mini grids in your country or region?
So we have got almost 27, 30 responses.
Wait.
We'll wait for a few more seconds.
Yeah, 5 seconds.
More. Quickly.
Can you share this? Share the screen. Yeah.
I'm ending the poll.
Thank you. And I'm glad our audience took interest and have voted. Actually, this is also very tricky because it depends on which country, which region, and what is your experience with mini grids. Now, let's go to the specialists for the real answer from what they see. So in this next session, we would like our panelists, and if you could please keep your videos on and take a crack at the question for 2 minutes each. The key issue, with one key issue or enabling factor for the success of mini grids in their specific area of project. This could mean even the projects they are doing, implementing, or where they are most significantly involved, or the country of their interest. So we would like to hear, starting in the same order, from, I think we would like to hear from the same order we had our talks. Suranjana, would you like to have a go at it?
Sure, Mr. Koshi. Thank you for that. I think for us, we're really seeing a lot of success in the integrated approach to being able to integrate mini grids with the utilities, as Shalin has already spoken at length about it. And for us, that's really one of the options that we see can really unlock faster movement and growth in the sector.
Thank you very much. Next, please. I think. The next speaker. Can I, Nathili is not on. Nathili, can you please give your 2 minutes of wisdom to us that in your perception and the overall project scenario, where is the success factor much higher and what are the challenges that face the mini grid program? We heard from the audience what they think, but that's very subjective. So we want to know from your perspective, which
I think,
yeah.
Thank you. No, I think I agree with the audience. Like, one of the things that is important to understand is like this community engagement, right? And under the framework of policies and also regulating agents that actually are going to be able to provide the right service and efficient service at the end. I think I'm going to come back to you in my closing remarks, but also it is important to have data and information that is telling us what is going on, evaluate the data and information, and being able to adapt when we're seeing there are some delays and challenges. In addition, I think also it is important for us to think about sustainability and how people are going to be able to afford the services that we're provided. It is not for the sake of us to expand services and to have a lot of, mini grids and the service available for everybody, but how people are going to be able to afford that is also important for us to think about what is going on. And finally, I think also including the 100% of the population, not only from the perspective of policymakers and also us as development agents, but also what people want and how they want it, and listen to that and be able to have like smart designs for us to provide that solution is key to have a successful project in this sense. Thank you.
Next, I think we at CSC would keep our judgment reserved because we are learning from all of you. Vineet, can we go to Ruchi is not there. Yeah, Ruchi had to leave early. Can you go to William?
Yeah.
William, for your perception on which factor is the most critical for the success of mini grids?
Yeah, it's hard to pick one, but I've already talked about the need for local currency debt finance. I mean, this is a project finance business at the end of the day. If you don't have access to local currency debt, you can't scale. So that's I think a key element. The biggest thing for me, though, I think I would say at the macro level is just the political economy that exists between the international funding community and many national governments. It's built around this idea that you're trying to mobilize huge amounts of money around large scale singular projects as opposed to a grouping of smaller projects, right? The generation that runs the development banks, the generation that runs government ministries, they're trained in a more centralized infrastructure model. And so there's really a generational shift that's required in order to move beyond that and get into the period where we need to get, which is being able to rapidly approve and deploy a portfolio of smaller projects as opposed to one large project. So I think that's a huge barrier. It's not something that you can change overnight, but it needs to be recognized, and it needs to have strong political support at the highest levels in order to be overcome. And then the last thing I would just say is that, there's a lot of communities that are really hard to reach and do so in a sustainable fashion. I think that there are communities where we work where we're confident that we'll be able to make a viable business out of our mini grids over the long term. But there are a lot of communities where more is required. You can't just do it on a purely commercial basis. We can't do it on a purely commercial basis. Certainly national distributions can't do it on a purely commercial basis. They're already losing money left and right. So, there need, and this goes back to my point around operational support over the long term. You're only going to achieve the potential for mini grids if there's some sort of operational support that allows for developers like Husk to grow the economy in these communities. And that's going to require operational support of some kind. Whatever that mechanism is, what form of support remains to be determined, but I think that's a really important element that needs to be discussed and addressed. Thanks.
Thank you, William.
Thank you.
I think this is the right time to take these questions because this has community involvement. A question from Dinesh Agarwal. He is asking that whether I have captured the cost of battery for the calculations of a project cost and for the overall cost, because overall capex, because 20 to 30% or more than that, the cost of batteries that typically cater the entire project. So yes, as I know you are concerned about the replacement of batteries. It takes around 5-6 years to run into full operations and all. Post that period, we need to convert the batteries. We need to change the batteries with a newer one. I must take an example here quickly. In the Sundarban Islands, those who have not aware about Sundarban Islands, it's in the delta of River Ganges at the juncture of Bay of Bengal. So there they have community-based solutions around 35 kilowatt. It's very small. So the people they are using and they are getting that mini grid is very successful, and they are getting confidence over the mini grids, and they are even paying very high tariff in order to replace the batteries, in order to run the project sustainably, so that they can replace the batteries in due course, 5 to 6 years, to run the mini grid very efficiently. That is 30% on top of.
Can we take details offline directly with them?
Which one?
We'll take it offline. That answer.
Yeah,
we are in the middle of our.
Yeah, sure.
I am sorry.
So that's all.
Debated a bit.
Thanks.
I would request Ms. Onyinye Anene to answer the query for all panelists for 2 minutes. That one key issue or enabling factor for the success of mini grids in their area of work. Onyinye, would you be able to give us an answer?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much. I think it's difficult to pick one, but if I have to, then a strong regulatory framework on all levels, national and subnational levels, will be critical. And the regulatory framework should also, factor in how the mini grids are financed, because I think that once we have a strong regulatory framework that is able to attract the right kind of finance that is needed for this, small scale multiple projects across the country, that will unlock the market for the private sector players to then come in and provide this energy access. So strong policy framework, that is clear on technical standards, clear on financing, clear on tariff, clear on compensation if and when the grid arrives, and that incentivizes everybody so that it is a win-win-win for everybody. Incentivizes the private sector, incentivizes the customer, incentivizes the government to uphold the standards, so that everybody comes into the space. The customer is able to be electrified. The private developer is assured of, is able to attract the right kind of finance, and is also able to, make their money out. And of course, the nation is electrified. I think the other thing that I would also add is that we have to consistently look at energy for development, where it moves beyond energy access. So on the second level, to make it commercially viable, where it's then a focus on income generating activities and productive use of energy. That way, once that demand is stimulated and is kept at a certain level, the mini grids consistently become commercially viable, and more players can come in, because we need as many players as possible to come into the space to end this energy access deficit across the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. May I ask Charlene Nagawa to share from her experience?
Yes. So if I was to pick out one key issue, I'm just going to link it to community engagements, and that's the ability to size appropriately for every site. It's inevitable. You cannot undersize, because then you will not supply reliably to your community. And then oversizing means you'll be falling short on demand, and the sustainability of the model would then be affected. So in this regard, the different things that affect demand are like culture. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, sure.
The different things that affect demand, culture, they cut across culture, economic activities, and also the trust that different communities have with the service that you're providing. So you consistently have to have community engagement, carry out different operations like the productive use of energy, asset financing across sites to boost this consumption, so that you can have the demand that you probably predicted when sizing for the system. So linking the two things is the adaptability of the demand, from the community, linking that to community engagement, which ultimately affects your design. And you cannot use the same predictions from site to site, because across our different projects, we have seen totally different behaviors. So different models work on different sites. And at the point of sizing, you can't predict that. It's during the operations that you actually have to boost to have a sustainable business model. So for me, that would be a major issue for mini-grid developers.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your experience from Uganda. Now I'll ask Binit whether there are any more questions we can forward to the panelists. Okay.
Yeah, we can.
I think with that very interesting observations from each one of you, we would like to thank you. There are questions, but they are something we can address directly, and where there are significant, we would definitely pass on the questions to many of you in your line of work. So thank you very much, and we hope to remain in touch with each one of you on the projects, because CSE intends to work more in Africa and also connect with all of you for the work you're doing there. And also, we realize that India is also so varied in terms of its state and region, that the experiences here are also equally varied, and we can learn a lot from countries in Africa, as well as countries in, the states of India, and how they wish to go forward with it. So we conclude this, and may I ask Nathalie to give last observations, concluding observations?
Of course, thank you, Koshi, and thank you, everyone. I cannot help it, so I'm going to try to summarize some of the key elements that were discussed across this conversation, but also I cannot help it that I'm a gender specialist, so I'm going to give my touch in regards of that. Well, first of all, one of the things that we talked about was about sustainability and how we are sure that people are able to afford and the service and to maintain the investments. We need to have people on site. They're able to reinvest their income, but also to be able to have jobs and productive businesses that are related to productive uses for them to be able to access and to turn their wheel around about this particular issue. The other thing that is important to recognize is that the policies that are going to be implemented are comprehensive from different perspectives in different sectors, including climate change, gender and diversity, ensure participation of communities, improve governance, transparency and anti-corruption was one of the things that we didn't talk about, but I think it is also important for us to be able to recognize that it's very important to have an enabled environment that is going to help us out to have large scales or not even large scale, but have programs that are around mini-grids and electricity access. Accountability is another thing that is really important and key for successful projects, and of course evaluation, and to be able to adapt accordingly. Gives me to my other point that it has to do with adaptability. We all know and so what happens with a pandemic hits, and that is something that we are not going to want in the future, but we need to foreseeing in these delays that are not only in regards of construction and whatever is going on with infrastructure, but also how are we delivering results? And we need to implement policies that are able to, adapt and being able for us to have the right tools and the right paths for us to be able not to experience these big delays in achieving our goals. I think it is also important and have to do also with these conferences, like this South-South collaboration, and how we gather lessons learned and best practices, and how we are able to adapt and to gather those lessons learned and be able to adapt in other type of contexts and environments. Also, the public partnerships with the private sector are key to keep working and to keep scaling this type of projects. And finally, I think this is like what I said, that this is like my touch because of my experience and my expertise. SDG 7, which is electricity access, and SDG 5 are interlinked. There is no doubt that energy access is going to help us out to achieve at the end some of like the goals that we have in regards of gender equality. And when you reach women and when you reach other sectors of a population as well, as a whole, as 100%, it is going to be beneficial for everybody. And we know that women and in general are multidimensional. There are no and we see a lot of differences, inequalities in women as well. But also it's important to know that women are facing a lot of different challenges to be inserted or to be integrated as a whole in the sector. I think this is something that Ruchi mentioned, that when we're talking about this type of projects, we're not only talking about infrastructure or the service itself, we're talking about people. We are working on this because it makes sense, because we're going to improve people's lives, we're going to improve their however they are living currently. So when we are seeing women that they represent at least or about 51% of the population, and how they are getting benefits out of like the implementation of this type of projects, such as clean cooking, when we know that women, because of gender norms, they are in charge of collecting fuel and cooking and all of that. For instance, they're getting beneficial of like a lot of like health outcomes. There are part of the implementation of clean cooking projects, and mini grids play a significant role for us to be able to accelerate this type of benefits. Also, how we integrate women in the sector as decision makers, and how we hear them and we incorporate that perspective into smart designs, and also how we translate that into the implementation of the projects, as well as how women are integrated as workers in the sector. It's important. We know we have a pipeline project because usually in around the world, we don't have enough women that are working in STEM field, but we need to have our own strategies on how we attract more young women to have this type of career path, and how we are able to attract them to the sector, and how we incorporate them into different roles in the energy sector. And finally, I think it is important that women as entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses, how they're able to be integrated in value chains, not only to provide different services, they're able to robust and enhance the sector, but also to them to be able to provide the services to everybody. Try to think about procurement that is actually gender inclusive, that is transparent, that allow women to access these opportunities as well. So I think I'll stop here, Koshi. There's a lot of things that were discussed as well that are really important, but I mean, these are my takes on this. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And we realize that it's Monday early morning for Netheli and for many of others. It's a Monday morning or a Monday midday, and you've given your time for us. We value that very much. We will summarize the sessions and share it back to you before we put it together into a comprehensive note. And my colleague Vineet is very good at that. And I thank my team at CSC also for Vineet and Asta and our senior team who backed us up at every stage of the preparation. We would be connecting with you again. We would probably have one future one on the mini grids in South Asia and Southeast Asia at some point. However, a webinar at the end of a month or on the 30th or 31st of the month is a feature which CSC would like to continue, and you'll all be informed of the topic. And we thank you once again, and look forward to being again on the same screen, on the same page, on a similar discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.